It'll count, I think. It's just... Thank you. We'll wait for that. But I wanted to just open it up to all of you and ask you, what's been your experience here in the United States as a Filipino? What are some of the things that you can talk about? Any word. You can throw out a single word. You can talk about, your story. Let's hear some of them, if you don't mind. And please share your name with me, because I'm new here. Yes. Hi, what's your name?
My name is Cherry.
Cherry.
And I first came here to the States. I was the first Filipino that they hired in their office.
Oh my gosh. Where?
Here in Glendale.
Oh my gosh. So the things I talked about, feeling like a little bit like you're a fish out of water, out of place, that sound familiar?
Like that, but they were so welcoming, and they were glad that they had me.
That's good.
Yeah, because I took the place of one of their employees who was internally. And they were so happy that, the job that was given to me was well done. And after a month, they gave me an increase of $1 per hour because they said I did a good job. So that was an impression for Filipinos to be hired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in some ways, because you're the first, it feels like, oh, I have to represent.
Yeah.
For us,
something like that, yeah.
so that we can leave a good impression.
And from that time on, they have a good impression of the Philippines.
Yeah. So you see how the impact of one person, it reverberates. It has effects even beyond that particular day. Yeah. Hi.
When I first came to California, I applied at the School of Nursing in California State, Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And guess what they told me?
What did they say?
We can't hire you full-time as a faculty member because
God.
all of your schooling came from the Philippines. And I just said, I'll show you what a graduate of the University of the Philippines can do.
Yeah.
And right after, they gave me a part-time job as a teacher. But all my students kept on telling everybody else, go to her, you will learn.
That's a powerful story.
And the next year, I got the full-time job. But it was really something that they told me, I had a master's degree when I came to the United States from UP. So you know how it is. You feel like you're a graduate of UP.
It means something.
So yeah, you have something in between your ears. And then when they told me, we cannot hire you now because all of your education came from the Philippines. That's when I said, okay, that's the system. I didn't know that was part of discrimination anyway. But I did my best with teaching students and all that. But you know how students are, they talk to each other.
Yeah.
And then the other faculty members heard about how I teach, how they learn a lot, and all that. So the next year, I didn't have to reapply. They just say, okay, you got the job.
Wow. We have trailblazers in the room. I love hearing these stories, and like our expectations when we come to this country, they're not perfect when we arrive, and so we just have to wing it. It seems that my PowerPoint presentation is in the same situation where my battery isn't charging, but we're resilient, feel like a good Filipino immigrant, we figure things out, right? So thank you for sharing those stories. I think that's a good starting point. Because the history of Filipinos coming to this country, a lot of us came maybe in the 1960s, 70s, 80s. There's been Filipinos coming to California since the 1910s, the 1920s, and the 1930s. And the reason that Filipinos came to the United States is because prior to them arriving, there were Chinese immigrants that came, there were Japanese immigrants that came, but the people that were from here, you know, folks, white folks basically that were here, felt threatened by the economic competition, and so they created laws that banned the immigration of Chinese and Japanese people from coming to the United States. They were literally said, no more. So that was happening in the 1910s, 1920s. And guess what? What is the unique situation of the Philippines in 1920s? Can anyone?
The U.S. and the border, the Commonwealth.
The United States and the Philippines had not just a close connection, the Philippines was a colony of the United States. Yeah, it was a colony of the United States. And what that meant is that even though there were laws that said you can't come from Asia, Filipinos were the exception to the rule because technically they were considered what the US called American nationals. It's a key word there, nationals, not citizens. So in some ways the US said, you can migrate, but you have to follow our rules, and you're not allowed to have the same rights as other people. You can't own property, you can't become a citizen, you can't vote, you can't even interact or marry people who are white. And that was difficult because a lot of these early Filipino immigrants, they only invited men to come. Because what did they want them for? Where were they working? Were they working in hospitals?
No.
Where were they working?
Farms.
Farms. They were working in farms. Plantations. They were working in factories. Pineapple farms in Hawaii. This is a major part. You all know your Filipino history. This is wonderful. But that was a very difficult life. In fact, maybe about, it's 2024, this is the 100-year anniversary of the anti-Filipino riots that happened in Northern and Central California, where people were so upset at the presence of Filipinos here that they rioted. And some of these riots were led by, you wouldn't believe it, police officers were the ones leading these riots to try to basically kick Filipinos out of their communities, to send a message that you don't belong here. So I mentioned that because even though these things were happening with Filipinos, they were treated very poorly, they weren't allowed to live the lives that they wanted to, they still managed to form community. In fact, their ability to form community with each other was their saving grace. It's what helped them survive. So this generation of Manongs, because a lot of them were from like Ilocos, right? So they're called the Manongs. They came here and then they formed communities. They formed friendship groups. They played music. They danced. They did all sorts. They wrote stories. They did all sorts of things. And in some ways, you know, the type of discrimination that may happen here today is different, but the lesson is the same, that we need to rely on each other as a community when those kind of moments happen. So before, in the early 1920s, Filipinos came primarily as farm workers, but again, the same thing that happens to Chinese and Japanese laborers happened to Filipinos, and the US said, no more, we don't want any of these people coming. In fact, we're gonna pay them money to go back to the Philippines. It's called repatriation. And we don't want them to come anymore. So there was a big period of time between the 1920s and the 1960s when pretty much no Filipinos were coming, with very rare exceptions.
Around 50.
50. Imagine that. How many people are in this room?
22.
22. So we already took up half the spots that can come to the US, the quota per year. So here's the thing about the US is that they closed the borders to a lot of immigrants, including Filipinos. But of course, World War II happened. US is trying to win this war. What did they do? They reopened the doors to what occupation?
Medical.
The medical field is one. What's the other one?
Navy.
Navy. Military.
nurses.
Can anyone guess how many Filipinos fought in World War II? Just throw out a number. Huh? How much?
10K?
10K, 1,000, huh?
4K.
40K,
90,000.
90,000,
50.
15, 50,
Many.
250,000
Wow.
Filipinos were involved in the military in some way, shape, or form to fight for the U.S. so they could play a role in the war. 250, a quarter million people. Yeah, and then because obviously there's a big need for medical care, they also started to open the door to Filipino nurses in particular, and physicians as well. So my dad is over there. His ate, his oldest sister, we're gonna see her next week. She's one of those few Filipino nurses that came in the 1950s and 60s before they changed the laws.
Is that with the exchange visitors?
Yes, exchange, nursing exchange. Exactly, exactly. And then what happened? Ate, she comes to the U.S. They did, but what does she do first? Starts with a P. What do you do when you're
Petition.
petition? One comes, then another comes, then another comes, then another comes, then another comes. And suddenly everyone that's from our home province or our community is here living in Carson, California, or Eagle Rock, California, right? That's the power of, this one immigrant can result in a broader community. So what's ironic about Filipinos fighting for the U.S. in the war, or Filipinos being the one at your bedside, taking care of you when you're sick, all over the country, not just in California, all over the country. For example, my dad's sister went to Michigan, I believe, right? Was it Michigan?
Yeah, I read an article about Filipino nurses. They hub or the foundation of nursing in United States right now, these years. It will fall apart without the Filipino nurses.
Exactly.
In other words, it's the sustenance, the
Yeah.
foundation of the health care in United States, especially California.
The number one source of nurses
Right.
is Filipino nurses.
Yes, without them. And it was very obvious during the pandemic.
It was very
But
obvious.
unfortunately, they suffered a lot because a lot of Filipino nurses died.
They're the number one group
And
that
it was
died.
associated with hypertension.
Yeah. And that's
That's your
How many of you how many of you are a Filipino nurse or have a Filipino nurse friend? What is the schedule? You work 3 days on, 3 days off? What do Filipino nurses do?
40 hours a week.
During the pandemic, they volunteered.
They volunteer.
They volunteered.
They
But
volunteer.
there's sacrifice.
They also have a couple of jobs because they're sending money back home to the family that's there.
Yes, overtime.
3 jobs. It's so common. Oh, Filipino nurse, their schedules. Oh, they work Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. The other 3 days, they'll work in a different hospital. They have 2 full-time jobs. Because they're supporting not just themselves, they're supporting a whole village back home. So, the story of Filipinos, they're fighting for the U.S. efforts, they're caring for the people of the United States when the U.S. can't find anyone to care for them. The irony is that there's still ways in which they were experiencing discrimination. So with the Filipino folks that fought in the military, they weren't given the same recognition as Americans that fought in the military. So you get a lot of benefits, like for fighting in the military. The ones that fought in World War II were not given the same benefits, even though they risked their lives. And with Filipino, yes, go ahead.
In terms of discrimination, my friend mentioned that her father, they were studying in San Francisco now. In the 50s, they were allowed to study. And even as he studies and he goes into a bus, the bus driver would say, "What are you doing in the front? Go to the back, the blacks." Now, he'll go into another bus, and the bus driver would say, "What are you doing in the back? You're not black, you come over in the front." And
Yeah.
so it's like, okay, well, make up your mind, where am I supposed to stay?
Yeah.
Stay in the middle.
Stay in the middle. What was your name? Catherine. I'm glad Catherine brought this up for a couple reasons. Thank you. Yay. And this was the slide I was going to ask. What's your experience? There we go. Experience in the United States. Balikbayan, right? But Catherine, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
This idea of Filipinos, being technically part of the United States, very close ties to the U.S., but then you come and then you're not granted the same benefits. You're the ones who are dying during the pandemic. There are some hospitals that they put up rules that say Filipino nurses, you're not allowed to speak Tagalog.
Oh, yes. Not just nurses.
Not just nurses. So they can't even be themselves. They're putting themselves out there, and they can't even be themselves. So it's in some ways there's a similarity between the experience of Filipinos and other minority groups, Black Americans, Latinos. And I'm glad Catherine brought that up, because sometimes I think when we come to the U.S., we think of ourselves in this Filipino community, but it's also important to think of us as a group that's experiencing very similar struggles as other communities. Have you ever heard this term, divide and conquer?
Yes.
Divide. This is one of those things with the United States, is there's been a history of when you have different groups that seem to have a shared experience, let's say discrimination or racism, they'll figure out a way to divide and conquer because they know that these groups are more powerful when they come together. That was in a lot of ways, when you think of the 1960s, that was the power of the civil rights movement. The Black civil rights movement was also coinciding with Asian American movement, like power movements, like Mexican American social movements, women's movement, etc. People realize if you come together in numbers, you're a lot more powerful. You can actually fight for your civil rights or the rights that you deserve. So I mentioned those things because there's the farm workers. Sometimes when we're living here, we're grateful for what we have. We have a nice, we're able to survive, we're able to thrive, we're able to support our families, not just here, but back home. But sometimes when those good things happen, we sometimes forget that we come from a history where it wasn't always like that. Again, 100 years ago, I think this January was the anniversary of these major riots where, Filipino club bombed. They had signs like this throughout California that say, "Get rid of all Filipinos or we'll burn this down." How many of you have ever seen these images before? For whom is this new? Let's see. 19. This was from a 1930. This was 1930. But there was many headlines that were like this. Since this is new, I just want to. What's your reaction to this?
PT?
Huh?
Well, we're like, what's happening?
Experience like in terms of the persecution. Yes.
It's not only, I noticed it's a Stockton. Remember there, a few years ago, there was some guy who killed a lot of kids because they were Vietnamese, I think, in Stockton.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess not just Filipinos, when the Filipinos leave or something, another group like the Thai and the Cambodians or whatever
Yeah.
take over. So apparently there was some hatred towards Asians.
Yeah, there was, and we talk about mass shootings. Unfortunately, are things that happen in this country. People always say Columbine is the first one, but actually it was the Central California shootings where it was Asian kids that were killed. But we conveniently forget that was one. We always reference Columbine, but forget that happened as well. Yes.
Yeah, it just makes me think about how we say one thing and do another thing. You know, and the United States has been always regarded as, you know, a place where people could come for a new life. I mean, when you talk about like the Revolutionary War, right, and you know, separating ourselves from England, and you know, and there's probably other examples. And you know, my grandparents were immigrants. Now, you know, we weren't people of color, but we were Polish. So guess what? You know, you're as a Polak, you know, you're regarded as less than other folks. Same thing happened with the Italians, with, you know, Croatians, with whatever. But it occurs to me that we say, you know, let's welcome everybody. You know, come to, you know, our teeming shores, and you know, we've got the Statue of Liberty that, you know, stands, you know, in New York Harbor, and yet we say that, and we do very different sorts of things that are really pretty awful.
Yeah, and it's a contradiction. Sometimes for myself, you know, I grew up, I don't know, I feel like I have pictures and photo albums where I distinctly remember, like, I used to collect US flag pins. I have like collection of the coins of the US president. I was very proud to be American. And then you learn this history and you're like, oh my God, like there's this weird contradiction and including harm for the community that I'm from, Filipinos. How do I grapple with this contradiction? And I'm not here to, I'm trying to think of a better word, but like poo-poo on. Like I'm not here to like have people form negative impressions of the United States. I'm not just trying to sort of swing the pendulum backwards. What I want to emphasize is that it's very complicated. It's very complicated, even for folks that we now see as white. As you mentioned, Polish people, Italians, Irish people, they were treated, Jewish people were treated very poorly. Catholics were treated very poorly in the U.S.
Catholics are not Christians.
Yes. That's what was the big controversy with John F. Kennedy when he was elected president. They're like, oh my gosh, he's a Catholic. That's dangerous. The Pope is going to be having his, you know, influence on this country if we let that happen. That's the kind of fear mongering that was happening.
What I cannot understand is why is it that Americans, for the most part, don't realize that the U.S. colonized the Philippines. It seems like they are taught in school that, you know, Spain ceded the Philippine Islands to the, and it's funny, it was my husband who asked me, why are there so many Filipinos in the United States? And I gave him a very smarty alecky answer. I said, I blame the United States for it. I said, you colonized my country. The word colonize stuck to his head, and he couldn't fathom the word colonize. Because I said, you colonized my country, we just got our independence, and here comes the U.S. getting our independence. And so he said, he did not tell me, but he went to the library and read Britannica.
Oh
That's when he realized that I knew what I was talking about.
Yeah. And I think it's important to sit with these. It's okay, because think about us as just as a human beings. We're contradictions too. For some people, we're the good guy. Some people think we're the villain. Like in our lives, maybe someone thinks of us as their rival in the workplace, but others are like a best friend. We're all living contradictions. Same thing with history. It's like a living contradiction. But the more you know, the more you can feel a sense of empowerment. Because what happens when these forms of discrimination occur or racism occur, our reaction is, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with what I'm doing. When in fact, it's actually a bigger pattern that we're not able to see. That's as you know, a lot of black academics that write about race and racism, they say that's the design of racism, is for us to think we're the only ones experiencing it. And what happens when we feel this? We feel embarrassed or shame, maybe we should have done something different, and then we're silent about it. This is why this space is so lovely, is that we're able to get to know each other over time. our boundaries break down, our walls break down. We're able to share some of the topics that are sometimes scary to talk about.
Well,
Yes.
I think, you begin to wonder why we came to the United States. We have also to be thankful for the doors being opened to Asians, to Filipinos, the purpose of which are manifold. One, for economic, we earn more here. Number two, the educational opportunities are tremendous. Now, I'm telling you, in the academic field and even in my training, there was discrimination initially. I finished internal medicine and general surgery at PGH,
Oh,
UP.
in Quezon
I
City.
have to do my training here. I had 5 years in the Philippines and 5 or 8 years training to be board certified in surgery in United States at Wayne, Michigan. I'm from Michigan. And during my training, my director was a white Englishman who never had any training in the United States, but he got the director because he's white. I speak a little accent, he speaks English, British. And that's one discrimination. And then, I struggled so much in my residency in surgery because I'm an Asian, I'm a female, and I'm a foreigner. But I'm thankful for that opportunity because to get into a program in Detroit is very hard. We have to pass a lot of exams in the Philippines before we come here. And there are 2 sets of exams, one harder and one easier. And they give the hardest one to the Asians if they don't like. So, but I did not complain. During my residency training, I see the white residents working very easy. I had to work 20, 30 times as hard as them. I did not complain because they didn't ask me to come here. I came here because I want to grab that opportunity for higher education. So I don't complain about discrimination. I'm aware of it. I'm not tolerant of it. I accept it, but I have to do something. I begin to bring out what is positive in me and show them that I can do it.
And maybe for the
And
next,
I did it.
and for the next Filipino that comes after, now
Yeah.
you're there,
Yeah.
you can open the door.
Yeah, I don't want to go in because they didn't ask us to come here. We came here to grab the opportunities, but we should not internalize the discrimination. We have to acculturate ourselves, blend with them, and show that you can do it just like the white person, just like anybody. And that should be our attitude, and they will respect it for that.
Yeah.
Without that, that will sit down.
I'm glad you bring this up about. Oh, that's okay. I'm glad you brought this up because there's a lot of groups who are not white that feel similarly, or they have to try twice, 10 times as hard. And then women. Women have to try extra hard compared to men. And we're not given the same. I'm not a woman, sorry. Like women are not given the same treatment as men.
Yeah.
So you add those 2 things together, Filipino and woman, it's like a double strike. And so it's
But it's better nowadays compared to 1975.
yeah. And the awareness of the discrimination is important.
It's good.
It's important. And I think it's important now because we now live in the United States where there's places where they're literally trying to erase.
The Asians in
history.
California are less discriminated than in the Midwest. I come from Michigan and I feel it.
It's different because there's
Yeah.
Asian community, so it's a little bit of a buffer.
You have a strong Asian community in California.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
You know, even if we spoke English and we understood that, culture shock was evident, and I don't know if if people were aware that when they came here, there is what they call culture shock.
Yes.
In spite of the fact that we know certain things about how we live here.
Yeah, there is. It's just not the same. There's a Filipino, a very prominent Filipino named Jose Antonio Vargas. You know, he talks, he's an undocumented immigrant, he's a big fighter for our documented immigrants. and he always tells this story about when, you know, he learned English in the Philippines, but when he came here, some kid said, "What's up?" And he interpreted that as like, what's up? Like the sky, right? He didn't understand the context